How long have you been involved with him? I asked, the chaos swirling all around us. Nina fixed her gaze on me, her tension palpable, much like a cat encountering another cat in a narrow alley. Her eyes flitted about, taking in every detail. "Why did you hit that man?" she shouted, needing to be heard over the excited chatter of people eager to see both the man on the floor and me, the one responsible for putting him there. "Because he told me he had been intimate with you. I felt no compulsion to let him off the hook." "But he never mentioned it to you," I sighed. It seemed like we were going to have to navigate a complicated path to uncover the truth. Grasping her arm, I led her out onto the balcony. The cityscape before us was impressive, but my mind was elsewhere. "Eddie, what is going on? You just stood up and hit Victor for no reason. Damn it. Why can't she acknowledge that I possess a level of intelligence that understands more than just words? It wasn't for no reason. I'm not some crazed individual who assaults strangers without justification. I told you it was because he was intimate with you, my unfaithful wife." She turned on the faucet, tears spilling down her cheeks. "How can you say that? How dare you?" "I have never." I interrupted her. "Yes, you have, and denying it now won't change anything. So why don't we just get everything out in the open and hopefully find some relief from this mess you've pulled me into? Why would you say such a thing? I have always been completely honest and faithful." "Enough," I shouted. "I've known about your infidelity for weeks now. I just didn't know who it was until tonight, until he revealed it." "But he never said a word." "He didn't, but the message was clear as day." "I don't understand," she wailed. "I was going to have to wait anyway until the emergency services arrived, police, ambulance, maybe even the fire department or the army. It all depended on who had been called, so we might as well work through this." I told her to stay put, injecting enough firmness into my voice to ensure compliance. I went to grab us drinks from our table and that lovely cigar case with the built-in cutter and lighter from the suit jacket I had hung on the back of my chair. I cherished that case just as much as its contents. I had since Nina gifted it to me for my birthday the previous year when she had been promoted to department manager. Shortly thereafter, I bought her a beautiful sapphire and emerald pendant. We both enjoyed giving each other gifts that we had thoroughly and thoughtfully selected. When I returned, I found her slumped in one of the metal wire chairs scattered across the hotel balcony, which lined the conference room her company had rented for that evening's award ceremonies. As I pulled up another of those uncomfortable chairs and settled beside her, she attempted to speak. "Eddie, I held up a finger to silence her, signaling her to wait. Then I pulled out a cigar, clipped it, and lit it. Once it was glowing, I turned to her. "You've been unfaithful to me for the past few weeks, perhaps longer, most likely longer. You thought you were concealing it, but you weren't. Your stories were what exposed you." She looked astonished. "What do you mean, my stories? What are you talking about?" I let out a bitter, rueful laugh. "The tales you and your female friends share when we all gather. We were still quite young, married for 6 years with our daughter Emma, and had many friends who were just like us, yuppies, I suppose you could call us, though I dislike identifying with that term. Every weekend, we would gather at one of our homes or venture to the lake or park for a barbecue and drinks. Naturally, at these get-togethers, the men would slowly cluster together in one group while the women formed another. Each group would entertain the others with stories about their partners. The men would catch each other up on the happenings in their lives, discussions they had with their wives, decisions made, plans for future vacations, or new places they had discovered that their children might enjoy. Eventually, the conversation would shift to business, politics, and, of course, sports, with side discussions recalling the past, each striving to make their stories more engaging or humorous than the last. We all shared a pretty good sense of humor, with bursts of laughter regularly erupting from the men's group. The women, too, would laugh, but their conversations often seemed to linger on a more basic level than ours. There were no strict rules or even conscious decisions regarding when and how the groups formed, and people would frequently drift between groups to chat with others, reminding a partner of something they had just remembered, sharing a juicy piece of gossip that couldn't wait until later, or simply seeking a hug or a hand squeeze. That's just the way people interact when they come together. I had lingered close to the women's group often enough to know that their conversations typically revolved around husbands, children, homes, or new purchases. Of course, the men discussed those topics too, but the tone was markedly different. The women in our friend circle would begin casually gossiping about their lives, which would gradually evolve into discussions about their husbands' actions, eventually transforming into complaints about what their husbands were doing wrong. When it came to grievances, husbands were the favored subject, even surpassing complaints about their children's moods, messiness, and eating habits as the primary source of frustration. It would start off lightheartedly, with a touch of emphasis here and there when describing something a husband had done, leading to much laughter among them. Then, it would quickly escalate into a competition to outdo each other with tales of how terrible their husbands were and how badly they messed things up. Each story would be punctuated by uproarious laughter at the biting remarks thrown in, and the atmosphere would grow increasingly toxic with each new storyteller. Thank goodness for the children, who often interrupted these toxic conversations. Kids squabbling with one another, crying over a fall or scrape, or whining for a snack. Listen, I'm not complaining about the kids. They were just behaving like kids typically do. I've come to realize that this kind of situation is pretty common when women gather. Honestly, I think many husbands are total jerks who don't deserve their wives. So, these conversations serve as an outlet for the women, allowing them to vent their frustrations in a passive-aggressive manner, which they can easily dismiss as just joking around. However, the first time I overheard the conversation escalate like it often does, I was completely taken aback. I was in the kitchen, checking on the marinade for the steak and chops, and could hear the women chatting in the living room. A sudden burst of laughter brought a smile to my face, and I began to listen more intently. Lana was teasing Leo, claiming that he always attempts to make a three-pointer by tossing his socks into the laundry basket from his side of the bed. He even tries to perform trick shots, making the socks spin in the air. Silly antics that make it seem like there's a crowd cheering him on. At least he makes an effort for the basket, Claire groaned in response. Jack just drops his socks on the floor as if taking them off makes them disappear. They're definitely there when I have to pick them up for laundry, she continued. I don't even mind that, Hank interrupted. What bothers me are the skid marks. Plus Don always manages to turn his boxers inside out when he takes them off. I have to turn them back right side out to wash them. It's disgusting, and I still have to handle them with my hands. Can you believe that? I couldn't help but silently chuckle at poor Don and his careless bathroom habits. He always tries to project a tough guy image, and then Iris chimed in. Ralph crumples his underwear if there are skid marks and stuffs them into his socks, so I have to dig them out again for washing. Are they the ones with minions on them? Troy asked. Oh, now he has new ones featuring the Avengers, Iris replied. Iron Man, Hank laughed. Actually, I think it looks more like a male version of Elsa, girl, Iris said with a straight face. The laughter from the entire group was nearly deafening. Wow. She just tossed Ralph into the garbage disposal of female opinions with that comment. The banter continued to get even more outrageous as the conversation progressed. They joked about everything from Ralph's apparently inadequate skills to Paul's awkward flirting and Leo's expanding waistline, which, by all accounts, could use a corset or better yet, a tighter one, were all scrutinized for their amusement. Each husband belonging to a wife in the group seemed to take more than one hit during this chat, and I honestly didn't think Leo was that overweight. It genuinely shocked me. I had believed these women were content in their marriages, yet here they were engaged in an unspoken contest to portray their husbands as the worst man within their circle of friends. There was certainly a lot of laughter, but it struck me as disloyal at best and outright scornful at worst. How could they go home to their spouses with such thoughts? Even if they didn't truly mean it, it felt cruel. There was no sign of respect. Fortunately for me, Nina didn't engage in these discussions. She would occasionally pass by and join in briefly, but would wave and smile when invited to sit with them. Until 3 weeks ago, we had been at Oscar and Helene's house, and as I walked past the living room window, I spotted Nina in the group, wine in hand, laughing heartily. Both puzzled and curious, I entered the house and stayed out of sight. There was the usual complaining about husbands' habits and undesirable traits, with each person trying to outdo the previous complaint. Then I heard Nina contribute. "Oh God. I know exactly what you mean. The sounds Eddie makes when he flosses his teeth." I heard her mimic throwing up, sneezing, humming the Frozen theme, and gargling all at once. I felt my face grow warm. "I think that's the noise Don made when we made love last night," Hank chimed in, the last romantic. "Not a chance." Nina laughed. "My husband is much more romantic. When Eddie finishes, it sounds like a veterinarian just shoved his arm up inside a cow without warning." She laughed loudly. "No sweet talk or dinner, just whoom," Claire chortled. "Not even a flower in sight," Nina concluded. A delighted howl of laughter followed. I decided to move on. I didn't want to hear any more of that. If there's anyone who knows how I sound at that moment, it's me. There wasn't a single truth to what she just said. When I climax, I don't shout or bray or do any of the ridiculous things these women had come up with. I release a series of long, low sighs, almost as if I'm experiencing expected pain. Similar to the discomfort felt when a doctor performs a thorough examination on your sprained knee. I didn't want to cause a scene in front of our friends, so I stayed calm but not unresponsive for the remainder of the day. After a day filled with wine and sun, we returned home, and after putting our 3-year-old, Emma, to bed, I simply hit the sack and fell straight asleep. But that sound kept echoing in my mind, and it promised to linger unless I worked it out. The following day was Monday, so I called Philip Driscoll in Human Resources and invited him to lunch on my expense account. Philip was German by birth and unfortunately lived up to the often inaccurate stereotype of Germans lacking humor. However, he was incredibly intelligent and, more importantly, had studied psychology at university before specializing in personnel management. I understand you're reaching out to the German regarding such an emotional issue because you know we are a deeply emotional people," he said, his accent pronounced. After explaining what I had overheard, I stared at him blankly. "Yeah, that was a joke," he replied after a moment of silence in his normal tone. "Sorry," I said. "I'm used to it. So, what do you want me to seek advice on? I want to understand why women would behave that way. Why would my wife do that and lie about me?" He chewed his lip and scanned the lunch menu. "You know, I subscribe to the philosophy of sexual economics," he stated. I did remember him explaining the theory one evening during a tedious work conference. "In my view, she's joining this group to denigrate husbands for one of 3 reasons. Which one? I can't determine that without interviewing her, which I assume you don't want me to do." I shook my head. I certainly didn't need her spilling that to the witches' circle too. I would plummet to the bottom of the husband hierarchy if she revealed that. The first and most obvious reason is that she feels disconnected from the women in your circle. She may believe she needs to reconnect and is willing to sacrifice your reputation to achieve that. I nodded in understanding. I had already considered that possibility. However, given that we had been holding these gatherings with our group for years, it baffled me why she would suddenly feel this way. First, you might have inadvertently hurt her with something you did or did not do, and this could be her passive-aggressive way of seeking revenge. I nodded again. What man truly understood what might irritate women until she finally revealed, sometimes years later, the truth about some terrible offense he had committed? I decided to delve deeper into that thought, examining my memories of anniversaries, casual comments I may have made, or worst of all, any crucial appointment, like a lunch she had vaguely mentioned wanting, that I might have forgotten to attend. Secondly, she could be attempting to undermine your status within the group to elevate herself and gain sympathy and support for something she plans to pursue. "Are you saying she wants to rally people against me?" I inquired. He simply shrugged. "It wouldn't be the first instance, would it? It happens all the time within families, particularly between siblings. You see, this ties into the theory of sexual economics. One person advancing at the expense of another to acquire resources or genetic material, depending on the sex of the individual involved." He continued to ramble on as we ate, reminding me vividly of why I didn't often share lunch with him, but he certainly provided a lot to ponder. "Who is hosting this weekend's gathering?" I asked later in the week, trying to sound nonchalant. I couldn't bear the repercussions if she discovered my thoughts. I loved her and didn't want to endure a month or more of silent accusations if she believed I was unjustly accusing her of something. Claire and Jack, she replied. That sounds nice. You seem to enjoy spending time with the girls, I commented. I do. They're a lovely bunch, she agreed. You seem closer to them than you have been in a while. Yes. I'm not sure why it took me so long to feel comfortable around them. I mulled that over. Could it be that they were terrible people devoid of loyalty, respect, or a good opinion of anyone? How could anyone truly relax in their presence? After my wake-up call regarding the girls, I started paying closer attention to their group conversations. If one of them was absent, they would tear her apart, like a wounded fish surrounded by a pack of sharks in a feeding frenzy. Philip had explained that as well. Women tend to gossip more than men, and since they generally avoid violence, gossip becomes one of their main tools. Men are natural hunters, while women are gatherers. Though nuts, seeds, and berries are beneficial, they are far less nutritious than meat, so women are instinctively driven to seek out the resources that men traditionally excel at providing. In exchange, they offer intimacy and exclusivity, something that typically holds little value when offered by men. Women must market themselves to men. Hence, the makeup, clothing, and all the rest to compete with other attractive women. Another way to compete is through gossip, which involves discussing another woman's sexual appeal or exclusivity while simultaneously elevating their own worth. So, a woman subtly suggesting that another woman is a genetic threat makes perfect sense. Why don't they just directly accuse each other of being that? I asked. First, because that would diminish the power of the insult. It's a potent weapon that must be used sparingly. Secondly, first-hand knowledge would put her in the same category as the accused, which would lessen the value of her own promise of exclusivity. If that promise is weakened even slightly, it could cause her significant damage in terms of her genetic prospects. So, gossiping is the solution? Wow, that's messed up, I replied. It's the way our monkey brains have been wired, he said with a smile. But if they all know they're calling each other out, even just among themselves, why don't they confront each other about it? Studies indicate that most women believe their friends would defend them against such talk. Almost every woman interviewed insisted she would stand up for her friends and was convinced she did not pass along any gossip. Yet, if that were the case, there would be no gossip circulating at all. So, I wouldn't take that denial at face value. He paused to reflect. From an economic standpoint, perhaps it's to maintain the value of being exclusive. If a woman sleeps around, it increases the availability of intimacy in the market, which, like any other commodity, drives down the price. If all women participated, then the cost for a man to find intimacy would be nearly negligible. However, if the worth of a woman's sexual appeal decreases and her promise of exclusivity is questioned, that sustains the value for those women who are seen as virtuous and still good in bed for one man. He took a sip of his drink. Good wine, I murmured, regretting ever bringing up this topic. The idea of being viewed solely as a provider of resources for a woman in exchange for intimacy and fidelity felt utterly disheartening. This combination of thoughts led to another troubling realization. Nina had explicitly promised me fidelity when we married and implicitly guaranteed intimacy at the same time. Was I receiving neither? I certainly wasn't getting the level of intimacy I had been promised. That much was clear. Once a week, perhaps, more like once a month, which was more frequent than I wanted to remember. And if that nagging voice in the back of my mind was correct, then I wasn't receiving any exclusivity either. In fact, it seemed more likely that someone else was enjoying that. So I observed. I wasn't about to overreact. I had no idea if my suspicions were accurate, and if they weren't, then raising the issue might just provoke an angry response rather than defuse the situation. I loved my wife, but I was not oblivious to the fact that she could be self-sabotaging at times. For almost 4 weeks, I watched her closely. Honestly, there wasn't much that stood out, except that each weekend, she seemed to be rallying her friends with increasingly sharp comments. Then the awards evening rolled around. I surveyed her colleagues, questioning whether there was a hidden, sexual tension simmering beneath the surface. It seemed logical to consider. Nina left for work at 8 in the morning and returned home at 6 in the evening. There were no girls' nights out apart from her birthday celebrations, when she and her friends would enjoy a show and dinner at a fancy restaurant, often sharing a hotel room. A quick look at her Facebook and the timestamps on her photos suggested that if she were to have an affair, any potential lover would need to swoop in, get intimate, and be gone within 10 minutes. While that was technically possible, it felt highly improbable. So, where were the men who might have entered her life and possibly her bed? At work, naturally. For some inexplicable reason, perhaps fueled by my intense suspicion or perhaps the utterly outdated Zapata mustache he wore, I noticed him immediately. He was the type to mingle, laughing and joking with others. As he approached our table, he greeted everyone before finally acknowledging Nina. Their eyes locked, and they exchanged a subtle smile. Then he glanced at me, a faint sneer curling at the corner of his mouth, as if he were dismissing me like an annoying insect. In a moment of impulse, I stood up, leaned over, and delivered a punch to the left side of his face with all the force I could muster. I am not a fighter by any means, nor do I possess the physique of a superhero, but that punch landed solidly. He fell hard and chaos erupted around us. People got excited because something unexpected had occurred, and it hadn't happened to them, so they reveled in the drama, making far too much noise. Nina had believed she could sneak away with her infidelity, only to find herself exposed at the most inopportune moment. Most of the higher-ups at her company were women, reflecting a growing trend. But despite their success, they could only offer intimacy and exclusivity to their partners when they had one. So, witnessing one cheater's exposure sent ripples of fear through the room, causing others to worry that their men might reconsider the half of the relationship that hinged on trust. Nina would not be the favorite topic of conversation for a long time. The stories women share about their husbands, where they embellish my flaws and distort the truth of our lives together, indicated the depth of disrespect that lingered. The creativity behind those lies was impressive enough to suggest she could write fiction. Was this all a strategy to gain the sympathy of her friends when she left me? She shook her head before reluctantly nodding. Yes, she whispered. So you were planning to leave me? I stated, feeling as if my life had crumbled around me, leaving me with nothing but an empty bowl. I wasn't sure, she confessed, tears streaming down her face. But she met my gaze with a resolute look. I was afraid. I frowned, confused. Of me? Seriously? You thought I would hurt you? She shook her head vigorously. A tear landed on the back of my hand, and I fought the urge to wipe it away. The coldness felt like a frozen betrayal. No, I never thought that. You would never hurt me. I was scared of being alone. So, you chose the one path that would guarantee it? That doesn't add up. Besides, you had Mr. Silverstatch to keep you company. You were prepping for a smooth transition from me to him. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. No, it wasn't like that. I knew he wasn't the right choice after the first time. It took me a long time to commit to that first encounter, and after, well, the damage was done. I had become a cheater, something I had always loathed. So what difference did it make if I continued with someone I didn't even like much? I just wanted out of this marriage. I was so exhausted from always considering 3 people before I made any decisions. I could never act on impulse anymore. You did manage to impulsively end our marriage, I said carefully, maintaining a neutral expression. Who is this woman, and what has she done to the kind, loving girl I married? Yay for me, she said, her voice tinged with sadness. Of course, you could have just said, Eddie, you're a terrible husband, and I don't want to be married anymore. I've consulted a lawyer, and in 6 months, I'll be free to pursue Mr. Statch whenever I please. You could have chosen that path instead of betraying me. I get that you were afraid. You wanted to escape, but you feared being alone. Well done, Nina. You don't want me and you don't want him, so you've opted for a crash course in facing your fears. It will be costly, but worth it, I suppose. You make more money than I do, and you know I'll take better care of Emma than you will anyway. So, your spousal and child support payments won't be small, but hey, at least you'll get what you want. She pressed her lips together and nodded, and so our marriage ended on that note. while a cacophony of voices in my head clamored for more. More details, more about who, why, when, and how many times. Ultimately, the simple truth remained. She had cheated, and that alone warranted consequences. I have one demand. You will go to our friends and tell them that everything you said about me was a lie. You made up stories to paint yourself as a martyr when you left. Okay, I can do that, she sighed. You lied about me, and the sheer scale of your disrespect is staggering. Yes, it was. I'm truly sorry for that. I felt trapped in a situation of my own making, and the way forward seemed unclear. You heard it all. I nodded grimly. She placed her hand on mine for a brief moment. I am sorry about that. You didn't deserve it, and I fabricated all of it. You were a good husband, just not the right one for me. I sighed, feeling overwhelmed as everything unfolded at lightning speed. I had completely lost control. It felt like I was in a speeding car without brakes, and the steering wheel had slipped from my grasp. I had no idea how to navigate this situation. It is not every day that you attend a party as a married person and suddenly find yourself single, with a little girl to care for on your own. There are not many self-help books that cover that scenario. You realize they are going to talk trash about you for years to come, right? I know. I suppose I deserve it. You were right. I should have divorced you first. Have you thought about where you will go? I asked. I was planning to find a place soon, she replied, waving her hands at the chaos still unfolding inside. I figured she would be facing some very tough questions from senior management. I wondered whether she would still have a job. That likely depended on Mr. Statch Marauder level of authority. Jesus, Nina, how did it all spiral out of control like this? What happened to the girl I married? She was intelligent, knew exactly what she wanted, and was beautiful, kind, loyal, and in love with me. Where did she go? She paused for a moment, really contemplating that question. I suppose she became a manager and took her role to heart, letting go of the very things she should have valued. Nina, I love you. I loved you. But I can't be a part of your life anymore. I'm going to step outside and see if the police show up. If they take me in, please bail me out in the morning. You owe me that much. Okay, Eddie. She did bail me out, and that was the last time I saw my wife. When I next encountered her, the divorce was final. She was no longer my wife. She was someone else's concern now. I had a wife. I had a woman I cherished deeply. Someone I had vowed to spend my life with and grow old alongside. She had come to realize that she no longer loved me and chose to cheat rather than confront me until the bitter end. That's how I viewed it. She committed the betrayal, and I was the one left to suffer. Now I faced loneliness and heartbreak, the slow journey of healing, and the reluctant search for someone to fill her shoes, distrusting all women from that point onward. It was going to be a challenge, especially with a demanding 3-year-old golden-haired enchantress to look after. Nina had left deep scars, but I wasn't defeated. I thought about Philip and his theories on sexual economics. I wondered whether being labeled as a cheating woman would diminish her value. After all, any man would have to question her promises of intimacy and exclusivity, especially if they were aware of her past, and they would be. I would ensure of that quietly. And so, we come to the end of today's story. Was it what you anticipated? Or did it take an unexpected turn? I'm eager to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share them in the comments below, and let's spark a conversation. If this story kept you engaged, make sure to hit that like button. If you're new here or haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.